12 seconds later.
Are you alright?
Yeah, I think we're all good over here. I'm just making sure
Awesome,
that,
that's
yeah,
great.
no, it's using the proper microphone. Okay, good.
So I'm just doing an interview for my college course. Just going to ask you a few questions about your YouTube channel and you as a person. It's my first time doing an interview as well.
No worries. I've been in the ear seat before. It was only a little while ago. I was at university trying to get used to all this myself. So,
What course were you doing?
I was taking a documentary studies course. I was originally going to go into MOPA, fell out because there's like a long list or whatever, but ended up actually being sort of a blessing in disguise because it meant that you got to study more stuff in a shorter period of time. So kind of just got in, got out. Because I know a lot of people who are like in university for 5 years and I've got like, mountain loads of debt, and I did not want that. I did not want to be stuck. I didn't want to be in my 30s paying off college. So
At what point in your life did you want to start YouTube? Did you have any inspirations or anything like that?
at the time, this may sound a little funny, kind of compared to the stuff I do now, but my first video I actually made, I was 12 years old. And that was back in the day with Halo 2, you had montage makers. So the one that I saw was called the Halo God. And he made one called, I believe it's called Unstoppable. And it's just one that is everything in Halo being synced to MC Hammer.
Can't touch this. Can't touch this. Can't touch this.
So it was just like, just really lighthearted, really fun, all that type of stuff. That kind of just inspired me as a kid to go and, get the videotape out and start recording footage. They were not even close to that quality. In fact, even my last ones, I made up until a couple years ago, even those ones are still not even close. They're awful videos, but that was really my first. That was what got me into video making and taught me a lot about editing and about editing software, recording. And I pretty much self-taught myself with everything. I mean, of course, there's a couple of YouTube tutorials, even at the time, but that was it was all self-taught. And that was my main inspiration to begin with. And that kind of then later on led to writing and reviews and then to what I'm doing these days.
How important is audience feedback to you, and in what way?
Audience feedback means a lot to me, mainly because the other thing as well is that you can always receive fan feedback. You just can't always respond to it because there's some YouTube channels that get to the point of the hundreds of thousands or even millions of subscribers at some point. The amount of comments that you're getting is just too much. You cannot reply to everyone. You can always go to a few. If I don't respond to everybody, I do read everything that I can. And if I see someone ask me a question like, oh, what song is that? What software do you use? All that type of stuff, or they just ask for general advice, I always try my best to reply to that because I think it's not only is it something that people don't really tend to expect from YouTube. Like on YouTube, a lot of people kind of got the reputation of having big egos and like, oh, I'm better than that. Like I said, I've been doing this for 10 years and only at the end of those 10 years have I gotten any sort of, videos that I'm proud of or got, some attention or praise from people. So, I'm thankful to have the viewers in the audience that I have, I value them and I want to respond and engage with them and stuff like that. So I always try to do that.
Just say thank you for getting back to me as well. I really didn't expect anything back, but thank you so much for getting back to me. It's great.
I love doing stuff like this. It's fun for me as well because I never got to do this before. I never had people coming over to me asking for interviews on podcasts and stuff like that. So, it's just as much, it's just as engaging for me as hopefully it is for them as well.
What are the pros and cons of working on YouTube?
Well, I mean, the main pro is that you really just get to, at least in my case, because I'm not affiliated with any network. I mean, I write for COD Connected, a gaming website, and but that's an entirely separate matter. Like, they didn't influence my Halo series at all. They never had any. That was entirely my project. And when I moved to my own channel, same thing there. I'm not affiliated to any specific network. I'm not doing any of that. The only money that I receive are from ad revenue, which isn't very much because, the views aren't all that huge there, and my patrons. But that's it. I'm not affiliated with anybody. So the main pro, of course, is being able to just do and say whatever you want. That's also the downside, though, because it means that you're having to do everything yourself. I write, I voice, I edit, I capture everything that I can. Occasionally, I'll use some YouTube footage here and there if there's like one 10-second clip that I need, but that's about it. And that's, of course, the main challenge. Like, I'm working on basically an equivalent of Mass Effect, what I did for Halo, another analysis of all those 3 games. And
awesome.
Before Andromeda comes out, but that's on March 17th. So, I'm having to really hammer away on playthroughs and writing. But then again, at the same time, it's almost kind of a blessing since it forces you to actually get your shit together. But yeah, I mean, to me, the pros and cons of YouTube are one, you need the self-drive for it. That's the main thing. It's not really a pro or con. It's just that it's something that you need, because if you don't, it's going to fall apart right away. I mean, like even this channel that I'm on right now, I had a bit of a break. Relatively speaking to what I was doing before, I had a bit of a break with a Call of Duty video that I did, but because I had to drop it and, looking for work and that type of stuff, within 2 months, all those subscribers they were gone. That whole audience was just skipped by already. So, with the reason I jumped on it when my Halo videos were done is mainly because I knew that if I didn't jump on it right away, that it was just going to go away again. And this is like my only real chance there. So, pros and cons of YouTube. Pro is you get to do essentially whatever you want. Con is it's really, really hard work. And a lot of people, I think, going into it, they don't anticipate what that workload is going to be.
Got a lot to get through. So how do you structure your videos, like with scripts and equipment? How do you structure them?
I never really concern myself with the structure. My typically when I write my scripts, I do follow a format in whether it's my Halo Years Later videos or my other reviews. There typically is at least a basic structure of, okay, like if it's a long analysis, I'm going to be covering everything. So we're going to start with pre-production. We're going to talk about the gameplay typically because, there's a lot of people that don't care about story in games. I cover gameplay first and then go to story later. And I always time code it so that people can just go to whatever they want. And, so that's about the structure I do. But at the same time, when I make like an individual video, say my Stalker video, for instance,
I've come back every January to see what appears on the awards top 100 chart. 2016's #1 winner was Stalker, Call of Chernobyl.
That the fun of that is I don't plan to do another mod video like that. Like I'm sure I will in the future, but it's not like the beginning of a series or anything like that. It's kind of, you get to do this really cringy melodramatic narration this one time in this video. You're never going to get that again. And that's kind of the fun of it. I like YouTube channels that surprise you and aren't just the exact same format every time, which there is a value in that. I mean, I watch the Philip DeFranco show, so, there's obviously a value in structure or format, but I think it just depends on the type of content that you plan to deliver. So in the case with me, I have a couple videos that I do know that give me a loose format. But even then, there's ways for me to play with that and to adjust things. And then for individual videos, just go complete haywall. So yeah, I don't worry about structure too much. I find that if your writing is strong enough, then people can forgive something that they're not used to.
You said you format scripts and everything like that. How do you format?
Oh, the scripts themselves, I just open up Microsoft Word and I just immediately get to start. At least what I always start with is at least the first 2 paragraphs, because that's kind of like you're setting the stage for everything. And after that, it's talking about after the intro plays, I then try to, after setting the stage for the game, I set the stage for the time that it was released. So in the case of Mass Effect, you're talking about a game that came out when BioWare was at the complete top of their game, when Microsoft were getting a lot of attention. This was really being the shift of when role-playing games went from, on consoles at least, being mainly Japanese to Western developers. You had your stuff like the Elder Scrolls or Knights of the Old Republic and that kind of stuff. A lot before that was just entirely PC, and this is kind of the time where it's coming more into the mainstream. And that was kind of what I've tried to set the stage for that. Then after that, I would typically, at least for now, I started the Halo series. I tried to sort of emulate the silly titles that they have for each of their segments. But after a while, I just dropped that because it was no longer fun for me by the time about Halo Reach. So by then, I just followed the structure of talking about pre-production in particular, because I find that's typically an area where games don't get much attention. I mean, there's a couple of YouTube channels like Examine Life of Gaming that really go into detail and research, but a lot of times people ignore it. And I've learned firsthand from QA work at Electronic Arts for a little while that all the little things really do add up in production. And that really taught me a lesson in what leads do that affects a game's production and development and what allows people to do in that case. So I find it really important to cover the pre-production, even though it's really hard sometimes to find information about it because it's kind of hush-hush, very secretive. And then after that, that's when I just talk about, like I said before, like I talk about gameplay and all that. The script is less a complete Word document and more like I'm making the thing in my head before I've already edited it. And that's where it's really important for me.
In your opinion, like with video games, and particularly video game analysis, how does video games differ from other mediums like film and TV and music, etc.?
Well, the big challenge, of course, is the interactivity element, because, you know, in a movie, I find it's easier to objectively look at stuff because you can say, like, because every shot, every music cue, every cut is really intentional. That is exactly what the director chose. Whereas in a game, unless it's something like the original Resident Evil that has fixed camera angles, it's typically really hard, it's typically harder to pin down exactly what the creators were going for. So, you know, that's another area. That's another reason why I try to look at pre-production, because sometimes I go to a scene and I think, were they trying to do this? But then my interpretation of that is very different from what they intended. Most of the time, that's not the case. Typically, if you've looked at games and you've played enough games, then you can typically figure out where X leads to Y. Like in Uncharted, they made this grabbable surface yellow to really highlight, because like yellow's an attention grabbing color. So they said, okay, you can grab onto this and all that type of stuff. So the main thing with analysis in games is, you know, the story elements are relatively easy because, you know, it's storytelling and you're trying to do all that. But from a design perspective, that's the main challenge. Breaking down how everything, the animations, the level design, the lighting, how it all fits together. That's probably the challenge of gaming analysis that I find.
Stepping on to something a bit different, what is your favorite word?
It's one I don't use very often. Definitely fuck, because the reason I don't use, like, anyone that knows me personally knows that I swear like a goddamn pirate. Like, you know, I'm just constantly cursing and all that type of stuff. And, you know, when I have, you know, Discord chats, you know, I'm typically a much more laid back and not really the very stoic and the analytical narrator type thing.
And I, for one, look forward to the day when an open world RPG will feature characters just as natural and believable as Naughty Dog's Ensemble.
You know, that narrative voice, that's the only time I ever speak like that. Anywhere else, I'm very callous and very laid back. But the reason I don't do that in my videos is because while there are some very great sarcastic personalities, like I love Raycevick content, and there's others like Yahtzee Croshaw and even other commentators like Charlie Brooker. I love those people. But, you know, in an hour-long format, I am not a skilled enough writer to make that entertaining throughout, to make the sarcastic, constantly cursing type of person. I'm not skilled enough to make that entertaining for an hour. And I feel like even if I was funny enough, it would still become a little bit grating after an hour when you're just trying to dissect a game properly. So as far as I go, is I just try to sneak little things here and there every time I do a video, just like kind of take that approach, which is probably where the Matthew Matosis influence sort of comes from, because he does that. He goes very analytical, and then out of nowhere for 1 minute, he just does a complete joke.
Call of Duty is a franchise that's known for its progression-based multiplayer and ubiquitous advertising, so it's easy to forget that the series began with admirable roots. But in order to confirm this, we need to go back to when I was 12 years old, and I shot my first Nazi.
And then gets right back onto it after that, like nothing ever happened. So that's kind of the sort of influence that I take there. But, you know, fuck is an amazing word. It's easily the most versatile. It's that you can apply to almost anything. And I actually find its usage and the way that different groups of people use it to be a little bit fascinating, in the way that it can just, its placement can mean all the difference between something being just lighthearted okay and then big fucking deal and really offensive. And I just find that really fascinating.
What is your least favorite word?
Sock it, and I'm not going to explain why. I hate that word. Anytime I see a socket wrench, I cringe. So it's just awful.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
I am currently going through Mirror's Edge Catalyst, and the problem with that game, I find in its story, is that it really does not treat the audience with respect. Like, it acts as if you are a fool, as if you cannot piece together that, oh, don't you understand? These two people look very alike, except they're not supposed to be. They could be related, but we're not going to say that because that's going to be the clever twist. I'm like, no, I see this 10 steps away. You know, I've been here before. So, you know, anything that hits me creatively is anything that treats the audience member with respect. And the other thing, too, is anything that presents itself accordingly. Like, you don't need to be wholly original to strike somebody emotionally. You know, I mean, a lot of people always go on about Telltale's The Walking Dead being such an emotional game. Its story isn't really all that original when you really break it down to its core. It's just extremely well presented, and it uses its interactivity, its very minimal interactivity, in a way that games typically haven't done in the past. So, you know, and same thing with other games like Spec Ops: The Line, or even Call of Duty 4, you know, is a really thought-provoking game in many ways, just because of the way that they make this really action-y, very, you are the military, you are going to stop these guys, and then turning some things on its head. So, you know, it's always about, I find that in games, it's a lot of games at work in particular are ones that do all those two things, but at the same time also let their egos go and just work together with the player to make it an experience. Because, you know, when you're working on a video game, because of the interactivity, you are developing a shared authorship, and games that really understand that, I think, really hit that plateau and kind of rise to be above the norm.
What turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
What turns me off creatively speaking? Like I said before, anything that doesn't treat the audience member with respect. The other thing I find too is when you work in any type of art form, you have to have at least a little bit of an ego, just to be able to put yourself out there to begin with. But, there comes a point when it starts to when it gets in the way of the story. Like, I mean, I find that the reason I think so many people go to Metal Gear Solid 3 as their favorite in that franchise is because I feel like that's the one where Hideo Kojima kind of put himself in the background. Like, he still is, his influence is everywhere on that game. There's so many weird stuff, but by that same token, it's not like MGS5 where he's putting his name at the end of every single episode they have to see, or these hour-long cutscenes or anything like that. When people... I think Warren Spector, the man behind the original Deus Ex, he strongly believes in shared authorship, and that if you are making a game, you are not making a movie. You are not putting yourself at the forefront commanding people what to do. You are working together. I think that's really important. So, yeah, so something that turns me off creatively, it's typically, my big gripe is this is particularly drained to novels, but really storytelling in general. And like a big thing that I learned is how I look at how many times you pick up a book and the back of the summary is just the entire 120 pages summarized in 2 paragraphs. So they're not actually, things that are really relevant to the story. They're all just set up. And if I've learned anything, it's that you tell the story, you don't set it up. Or either you show the story, you don't set up. Like, setting up is not showing the story. And there are so many games too that almost have the exact opposite problem, where they are so quick to ignore the setup. They just go straight in media res because, they want to get to the action. But then they have no buildup. They have no consequence. They have no, this means this and that means that. So, yeah, something that turns me off creatively is people that they worry about justifying their narrative rather than telling the narrative itself, or showing what it means or why it's meaningful. I feel like that's a big thing that really frustrates me.
What sound or noise do you love?
I'm trying to think of it's not that it confuses me. It's just that I'm really having to narrow down a single one. Because I find that, like, for instance, I made a video really praising Doom.
As mentioned by composers and content creators, there's a common trend at the moment of believing that scores are not supposed to be noticed. A theory that Mick Gordon rips to shreds.
And I find that game in particular really uses its sound design overall brilliantly, not just its amazing music, but also just everything from the synth beats to its shotgun blast to the clunks and clanks of the metal and all that type of stuff. Anything, typically sounds that I love are ones that do not just sound phoned in. There are plenty of video games that, because they're limited by either budget or just the library that they have, they typically use like stock sound effects. Except I've watched enough movies and played enough games to that I can really, I notice them. Like, I notice, that's a stock library, and I've heard this silenced pistol sound effect in GoldenEye, and I'm now hearing it in this, but sometimes it's used as a joke. Like, on a Run the Jewels album, they'll sometimes throw in a stock sound effect for fun, but then a lot of time it's not intentional. So, like, a big example is in the Metro games, because they had such a low budget and they're so limited by, there's these new developers in the Ukraine. They were just limited to all these stock sound effects, and it just drove me up the wall. So, I typically, in terms of sounds that I love, the main thing I love is just a unique quality. Any, like, to me, an electronic musician that really stands out is one that can take computers and make them sound new again. Not ones that just use the same plugins and libraries that are there, but ones that can, combine it with some sort of guitar pedal or whatever the hell. Something just to make that sound unique to their own.
Follow on to that, what sound or noise do you hate?
Stock sound effects, I absolutely despise them. Not even because they're inherently bad. It's just that the frequency. It's like a Linkin Park song where by the time it's 90th time on the radio, I am just completely sick of it. It doesn't matter how great it is. Stock sound effects drive me up the wall. Other sounds, I'm just trying to think there. Typically, I try to forget bad sounds. Any piece of entertainment and the soundtrack is off, it really bugs me. So like something like, I'm not sure if anybody watching has seen the Punisher movie, but I think that's a great example where you have this dark storyline, and then you have this guy called the Punisher, who's a guy has a fucking skull on his shirt, and it's playing like this sad orchestra music the whole time. Not even good stuff, but like sad orchestra music as he's like planning like this really brutal murder, and it's just really bizarre and out of place. I find that sound design is really not emphasized enough by people. And I don't believe it's not because, we're not supposed to notice the musical score. I agree with, what was the guy? Danny Elfman, I believe, guy that scored Batman. I think that's his name. He was talking about how, he grew up with Hitchcock, where he's noticing every single note of the music, and that's what he grew up with. And I absolutely agree with that. I love games like Doom where that music is there, and same thing with Deus Ex Human Revolution. That music is at the forefront, but it's not getting in the way of the experience at all. It's only adding to it.
What profession other than the one you're currently in would you like to attempt?
I mean, I already consider myself a bit of an aspiring writer. So, I've wrote fiction in the past, and then it was awful. So, but it was a real learning experience, though, because, you got to start bad before you start getting good at stuff. So, at some point, I would love to, the reason I study video games is because at some point I would want to work on one. I've got design docs on my computer and all that type of stuff. They're pretty light and very unrefined. But, at some point, I would like to work on a game. I'm not sure if I would ever be interested in going AAA just because of the amount of people and the amount of resources and creative restriction that is there because of that. But there's a lot of great, talented people out there that I would absolutely love to work with. So probably not something in the next year or two by any means, but definitely at some point in the future, I would want to make at least a game, or at least contribute to a project of some form in the future.
That's great. I'm looking forward to that. What profession would you not like to do?
Pretty much anything marketing wise. There are so many, when I was job hunting, a couple months back, there are so many writing gigs in Vancouver that are just completely centered on copywriting or marketing gigs. And with copywriting and marketing gigs, it's not that there aren't talented people there. There absolutely are. The thing is that even when a marketing team does an amazing job, like Halo 5 Hunt the Truth.
You've completed your mission, Spartan Locke. Mine is just beginning.
Halo 5 Hunt the Truth is a full-on radio drama. I don't consider that a marketing campaign, even though that is effectively what it is. It's a marketing campaign that ends up just being an amazing radio show by the same token. But the thing is, even when you do that, your product is still not the highlight, because you by your job, you're not making your product, you're selling someone else's. So, all that hard work that you do is still going to get forgotten by a lot of people in the long run. And I think that's in some ways just, sort of a creative tragedy. So, I don't want to work in an industry that doesn't value people's creativity the way that I think it should.
If heaven does exist, what would you like? What would you like to hear God say when you arrive?
What a God would say to me.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking that if I arrive at the project, I'm going to say, really? I got here? But if what he would say, I love if I would just go in there and instead of being all this light and peaceful thing, that ends up just being a complete balls to the wall party where he's just quoting the rip and tear thing at the beginning. I would love if it's just that exact same guy at the beginning of Doom.
Everything has clearly gotten out of hand now, yes. But it was worth the risk, I assure you.
That would be an amazing thing to get there, because I don't want, internal peace and boring and everybody loves each other. It's like there's no, what is there in that?
What is your favorite game, and in what way?
I don't have a one. I do have multiple games that there's sort of like there's the games that I think that are great, and then there's like the ones that are way up here that they're ones that even if I don't go back to them gameplay wise, I still think about to this day. The one that I think probably had the biggest influence me was Spec Ops: The Line.
We can't hold much longer.
Jesus, shoot it! Shoot it!
Which is a title that it completely flew under the radar, even to me when I first went and played it. Because I just got, just a YouTube comment about it one time, so I checked it out. That was the game that really wanted me to get into, or really, if not write games, at least study them. Because the thing about that game is that that was the one that taught me that you can affect people emotionally in a way that is simply not possible in any other format. You can put people in other people's shoes and can make them commit horrendous acts and still try to find a way to to try to justify it in some way. And in any other medium, that is simply not going to work. But because of the way the games work, it really gets you to sort of understand that viewpoint. And yeah, Spec Ops left me absolutely gutted and horrified at myself more than anybody. That, along with The Walking Dead, that was what got me into games writing. And that's what got me to really start thinking about that and really witness the power that medium has. I'm really glad that Machinima at least gave it a best writing award or something like that.
Yeah.
It deserves at least that. It's not that it has no issues. There's absolutely faults with Spec Ops, but in terms of the time that it was released, there was nothing. I don't think we're going to get a game like that in quite some time, especially not in the AAA space.
And final question. What is your least favorite game, and in what way?
There's almost kind of two different qualities there, because there's the worst game, which, I could say something like Superman 64.
The superhero game so incredibly awful, it should become legend as one of the worst video games of all time. Superman 64.
But I've never actually played it. So, in terms of the worst that I've played, it's worst game that I've ever played has got to be either, this might sound weird to people, but either Driven on the PlayStation 2, which was based on the Stallone movie of the same name. Yeah. And I must have been I think I was a 6-year-old kid, and that game still pissed me off. I was forgiving stuff like Test Drive Off-Road 2, and I was still going, what the fuck is this? And so, that was my first experience, a really terrible, just where nothing is acceptable. It looks bad. It plays bad. It sounds bad. Even the menu looks bad. There's not a single redeeming quality of it in any facet. And then more recently on COD Connected, I had to review a game called, I keep forgetting the name of it. It's Line of Defense Tactics, Tactical Advantage. That's the actual name. I keep forgetting it because it's such a god-awful name that I just dubbed it as Tactical Tactics in my review from there on out. And that name kind of speaks for the rest of the product. And, it was one of those games made by Derek Smart, and I know that he got pissed off in my review or whatever, but I don't think he gave a shit. It was just, no, that was, there's games like that. Line of Defense Tactics, Tactical Advantage was definitely probably the worst game I've ever played. However, in terms of least favorite game, I know it's probably going to piss some people off, but one of the games I was really disappointed by was Saints Row the Third.
There's probably an easier way to do this.
No doubt.
I'm not one of those people that get super attached to a single game in a franchise and then only wants it to be like that. So, I like BioShock 2. I like Deus Ex Invisible War. I like Thief, Deadly Shadows. I like a lot of these games that, that really angered. I like Halo 4. There's a lot of games that pissed off people that I'm totally okay with. Saints Row the Third is that game for me. Saints Row the Third is that game where I go, I do not accept this direction in any facet. And the thing that's funny is that I despise that game so much, but then Saints Row 4 comes out, and even though that game is essentially just Saints Row 3 but with powers, that was enough to change my mind for me, because that was the one where Saints Row 4 is one of my favorite games, and it's because that was not only did they just amp up the insanity of it, but also they really understood the critiques of both the games that came before and Saints Row the Third. They understood that people missed the witty script and that they missed the likable characters and they missed the really good cinematics and cinematography there. So, you know, they brought that all back. So I have immense respect for Volition, the company that made it, that they were able to take these two properties and to really smash them into one game that was, in my mind, should be acceptable by everybody in that fan base.
That concludes it. That ending it on a high note, that was great.
All right,
Okay.
no, I'm absolutely happy. Like I said, it was like I've never had stuff like this happen before. So, you know, again, this is just as much fun for me.
I was going to say, sorry I've been as pink as the blood in Infinite Warfare, but...
Yeah, but fucking who cares? I mean, like, I'm pale like a vampire, so it's not like it's my place to fucking judge. So, yeah, take care, bud.
Thank you. See ya.